Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students. You want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, yes, it really is harder to get into highly selected colleges. A great article from Michael Petrilli from Education Next. Mark and Anika will discuss, how can I tap into my campus's most valuable resources? Our question from a listener is, do you truly believe schools when they say they are need blind? And our interview is the middle part 2 of 3, with Julia Hutchinson, a senior high school student from Wisconsin, on a creative way to learn what the students are like at the colleges you are considering. And there will be no college spotlight for this week.
And friends, we have to start by just thanking each and every one of you for all you have done to help us grow our podcast to where it is today. I mean, it makes such a difference. This week, I had one college counselor say that she tells all of her parents that this is a podcast to listen to. And other correspondence we had as well, people putting it on Facebook groups and sharing episodes with friends, and just all the different ways in which you've done that. Even going on and doing reviews, all those things help. And downloading the podcast. And, you know, we call you our listening family. And if we say you're a listening family, then that means we should share some information with you that a lot of times people won't share with someone. And we're going to do that with you right now. So we have now surpassed 10,000 downloads a month in terms of the amount of people listening to this podcast. It's usually a statistic people don't like to share, how many people actually listen to your podcast. But I'll just put this in perspective. The average podcast gets 141 downloads a month. And any podcast that gets over 9,000 downloads is in the top 5% of all podcasts. So we're in the top 5% of people, and it's only because of you, and we just want to thank you. Now, there are celebrity podcasts out there, people that are on CNN and NPR and that get, hundreds of thousands. There's some even in the millions. And we understand we're a niche podcast focused on a niche audience, but I think being in the top 5% of all podcasts is a real tribute to what we have all done to share this information. And David and I just want to say thank you.
Yes, and it's funny because, Mark, we talk so much that sometimes my wife gets jealous. And
She really does.
Suspicious.
I'm like calling Dave when he's walking the dog, calling Dave when he's out working on his buildings, hearing hammers bang in the background because I don't want Frida to think I'm hogging all his time.
And she's like, are you really podcasting, or is that just an excuse to speak with Mark? So now we could say, no, we actually have people listen to us.
Yes,
She's still sort of skeptical, so you're going to have to show her the data.
Well, I have an easier solution. Take another gig in the Virgin Islands. When you're over there,
Exactly.
It's easy to talk to you without Frida getting jealous.
Like, what are you doing podcasting? Are you really podcasting? Just talking to Mark. So thank you, listeners. You do give me a reason to talk to my bestest buddy here.
Yeah, Dave's in a good mood, When we record, he always had these crazy names that popped up on the screen. And the way it works in Squadcast, which was the software system we use, you can manually put your name in. I looked up and it says Dr. Lincoln Penny. So he's embraced his name of frugality.
I love that,
he's embraced it as a badge of honor.
Kids, how to mooch off your cousins and invest that money in Chinese foreign national stock.
For those of you who don't know, growing up with Dave, man, my dad would take us out to all of us to a restaurant, his family and mine, and Dave would literally order nothing because my dad would give all of us money when we were traveling to Philadelphia or DC or someplace. He'd give us a bunch of money. Like back then, it was like $3 or $4 for a meal. It was a while ago. They would pocket his money and then mooch off our fries and burgers. Hey, do you not want that? You look full. So he could put it in his pocket. So that he had business savvy from a young age, if you want to put it that way.
Hedge fund manager instincts.
Right. So I call him Dr. Lincoln Penny. All right. All right, Dave. We got a great article to dive in today. But before we do, happy Easter to everybody. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina, from a hotel, as you guys know. visiting North Carolina State with my daughter, and it's Easter Sunday, and so we have to at least say Happy Easter.
It is. Okay, wait, don't forget the tip, man, the tip.
Oh, yeah. How can I forget the admissions tip, admission vernacular? Duh. All right, so first of all, episode 167. So one of the things I want to share with you, and I've mentioned this before, but maybe not as much detail. So College Scorecard is an incredible resource. You can go in there, and in the past, if you wanted to compare the average salary from a graduate from Georgetown to a graduate from George Washington, you could go in there and it would say the average salary, but it's a little skewed because some salaries are going to be a lot higher if students are coming out with a lot of like engineering, computer science type degrees. So you'd always see the highest salary at a place like Harvey Mudd, or one of the tech schools would be off the chain, right? Now what they have done is they've made an adjustment so that you can compare average salary from per major to major from each school. And so if you really want to go in, if you really want some good outcome data, you can go in and compare, well, what does the average computer science grad who graduates from, WPI, Worcester Polytech, stack up to the average graduate who graduates from RPI, Rensselaer Polytech, but keep in mind that information is only for people who applied for federal loans, and it's only first year data. But it's a great way to get data if you want to know, if you're really into outcomes and you really want to know what money people make at different schools, you can now do it by major. So that's the tip.
Awesome.
And the vernacular. All right, I'm going mid-level. You didn't get search right last week. So this week I'm going...
I got search. You got the definition wrong.
Yeah. Okay, now you're in charge. Now the term is score-free, Dave. What does score-free mean?
Score-free? Mm-hmm. It's got to mean that a school that's not going to take your SAT and ACT scores into consideration.
What do you mean by that?
Well, score-free, right? You're free.
What do you mean they're not taking? Are you saying that your scores are optional?
Well, okay, let me see. Score-free. Either you're not paying for the test or they are not going to consider the scores. It's like test blind.
You got it. You got it. I pull for you to get it wrong. So score-free is a euphemism for test blind. It means they will not even, they're emancipated from testing. They will not even look at them if you send them. I was trying to push you, man. Are you trying to say test optional? So no, test blind is also score-free. If you send scores to a school that's score-free, they are not going to see them.
So all I say to that is, man, can I have some ketchup with my fries?
All I say to that is get ready for a harder one next week.
I know, but in the meantime, we're feasted.
Dynamic scoring, man. Adjust it if you get it right. If it gets harder, if you get it wrong, it gets easier.
All righty.
All right, take our article away. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, well, this article is rather short, but I think there's a lot of grist.
I agree.
So it is by Michael Petrilli. It's a blog called Education Next. And it really is harder to get into selected colleges today. And it says, quote, a comparison of SAT scores over time tells a story. So she starts with an anecdote that we're all familiar with, Mark, because we look at what our kids are scoring and how good they are. And these mind-blowing percentages of applicants and the single-digit admissions. And it was never that hard for me to get into Princeton or to Harvard or any of our peers to get into whatever colleges they got into 20 years ago.
Hey, man, not 20, 35. Don't make it sound like you're like 35 years old.
No, I'm 40, man. But remember, count backwards.
Actually, 40 years ago. Did I say 35? Man, that's 40 years ago. Anyway,
yeah,
I had to correct it. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I know you're on a roll.
Well, it was unbelievable. So the question was, it was trying to qualify, is it truly harder? And so what he did is he first identified the top 100 national universities and 50 top liberal arts colleges based on U.S. News and World Report. And then he took the data of SAT scores from 1985. He got that out of Barron's Profiles for American Colleges. And there was a renorming of the SATs that occurred. So he used a concordance table so he would adjust apples to apples sort of thing. And then of those 150 SAT institutions, about 95 of them had score data available from 1985 that he could directly compare to 2016. And what they found was, shockers of shockers, that the median SAT scores for the most selective institutions have risen significantly over the past 30 years, and that, quote, it really is harder to get into such schools than 30 years ago. Now, he cited a bunch of school examples. We can talk about that later, but I'll just briefly say to wrap up that there are 3 or 4 major reasons for this. Number 1, the U.S. population has increased. Number 2, America is a richer and better educated country. Number 3, the upper middle class has really dominated in its growth of the population as it pertains to college admissions. And number 4, there's an increased mobility of these top students in terms of considering all these colleges. So that's a quick summary, Mark. Where would you like to take it?
Yeah, one thing, it's a great summary. One thing I like to say is, one thing he says in the preamble is he talks about, well, why don't I just use acceptance rates? Mm-hmm. Why am I using test scores instead of acceptance rates? And the reason he says he doesn't use acceptance rates are the following. He says acceptance rates have plummeted for most institutions in recent years, and we understand it to the application process. But he points out several reasons. One, he says that the Common App makes it really easy and affordable for people to apply to large numbers of schools. And we've talked about the stats about how many people apply to 7 or more schools, 10 more schools, 15 more schools compared to before. And the numbers are astronomical in terms of the increase. And he also talks about this. He says, I'll read this. It says, given that the college rankings list gives a lot of weight to rejection rates, colleges face strong incentives to push those rates as high as possible. By doing such things as generating large number of applications from students who are unlikely to be accepted. So he makes the argument that colleges can game their acceptance rate easier than they can game their test score averages. And that's debatable, because I can argue you can game both. But he's definitely correct that you can game or manipulate your admissions rates. And I'll just share, even though this isn't in the article, I'll just share a couple of examples, because I'm sure someone's saying, well, how do you game your admission rates? Well, here's one example. There are about 43 schools in the country that are affiliated with the QuestBridge program, which is an amazing, amazing program. I'll do a deep dive into QuestBridge, but it takes gifted and talented, and I mean really gifted and talented, under-resourced kids, and supplies a steady stream of these kids for some of the wealthiest and most selective schools in the country. And so QuestBridge literally sending almost 20,000 kids to these schools. So what happens with a school, if you're one of these 43 schools in the QuestBridge population, you work out a partnership in advance with QuestBridge as to how many kids you're going to admit. And let's say you're a school that's taking 30 kids, which is a lot of times they'll see those kinds of numbers. It depends on the size of the school. If it's a smaller school like a Amherst or a Wesleyan or a Williams or Pomona, Davidson, schools like that, Middlebury, it's going to be a lot smaller number than if it's a larger university like an Emory or a Stanford or a Chicago. Those schools may oftentimes take as many as 100, close to 100, where the smaller schools might take 15 to 30. But just to get right to the nub of it, Dave, I've had colleges admit to me that 13% of all of their applicants come from QuestBridge.
Wow.
So because there's literally thousands, of applicants in their system. So that's a way. I mean, listen, I'm not saying schools join QuestBridge to inflate their app numbers, but it does inflate their app numbers. Normally, they do join because there's incredibly gifted and talented kids, and they want them in their applicant. Well, let me get that straight. But the point is, they're not going to take, if it's a school that's getting 700 or 800 applicants from QuestBridge, and they're going to take 20 or 30, their numbers are going to go up. So that's one. Another way, Snap apps, VIP apps. We've talked about these before. Priority apps, where you get this email that says, you are one of the most incredible people in our applicant pool this year, and guess what we're going to do for you? 1, we're waiving the app fee completely. 2, we're waiving the essay requirement. 3, you're eligible for a $20,000 scholarship. All you need to do is sign your name. Okay, one of the reasons why schools do that, it's super easy. It can inflate their app numbers. They get a ton of people, and they consider that an application. Another thing, there's no official definition of what an applicant is. Some schools use literally filling out the first part of it. That's an applicant. There literally is not an official definition of what an applicant is. So those are just some ways in which schools can manipulate their application numbers. So he chooses not to use acceptance rates, because normally when you read any article about selectivity, it's all based on acceptance rates. And I will tell you this, The best way to actually look at selectivity is a combination of acceptance rates and test scores. That's the best way, but he chooses just to use test scores, which in and of itself, there's enough data for him to make a lot of the points that he's making. I also want to say this, it may be confusing to people. Like you and Dave are always telling me, or always saying that, 67% of kids get in and it's never been easy to get into college. Now you're telling me the opposite thing. So keep in mind, there's 2,300 four-year accredited schools out there. We're talking here about really 10% of those schools, 230, and even 5% where it's gotten even more selective, and then even 2 or 3% of that where it's gotten even incredibly more difficult. So the point we've said before still stands. It's never been easier to get into a U.S. college. We're just focusing here on the most selective of those U.S. colleges.
Well, yes, I did. And I just really want to emphasize, when you look at the Common App, Mark, remember when we were applying back in the antediluvian area?
That's really what it was. Antediluvian, that's a good word for it.
When that crazy guy was building that big ship to put all the animals in. but remember, we had to write out the applications by hand, that every school had its own unique application, that the fees were expensive even back then. And there was a really more of a regional focus. A lot of Midwest schools didn't know about East Coast schools and so forth. And so you had to put a lot of time and effort into applying to just one college. Consequently, most kids only applied to 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. Now, at a press of a button, you can apply to 50.
Yeah, not quite 50. The Common App caps at 20.
Right.
But still, it was very, very common to apply to 2 to 3 schools. That's all I did. I just applied to 2 schools. Like, that's unheard of,
That's right.
So these are all really good points. And I do think let's dive into some of the numbers so we can see some of the differences here that he does point out. And one thing I want to add to the data that he has here, Dave. So he focused on how test scores have really increased from 1985 up until 2016. That's what he did for his data.
Yep.
But I looked at 2021 data and the trend line just continues. So let's give an example. So he pointed out that if you go back to 1985, Elon had an average SAT of 952. In 2016, it's 1192. Well, now it's 1233. He pointed out how Boston College was an 1190. Once again, he's adjusted for the changes in the test. So this is a real good apples for apples comparison. And then in 2016, it's a 1360. Well, now it's a 1420. And Georgia Tech was a 1243 back then. And then he says it's 1410. Well, now it's high 1400s. And so the trend just continues. And I'll give one more example. He says UNC Chapel Hill in 1986 was 1110 average SAT. In 2016, it's a 1263. Now it's a 1395. So the point is, it really is harder to get into this subsection of schools. And why is that important for us to talk about, Dave? Because I think it's important for a few reasons. But why do you feel it's important? Why even pick this article? What's the upshot?
I think his point of relieve the psychic stress by introducing a level of realism and acceptance into the population. First of all, being rejected from one of these schools is, I don't want to say it's not a big deal, but the reality is it's purely a numbers game. And it does not mean that you were not competitive or acceptable or in any way couldn't succeed at this school. It just simply means that the numbers are so crazy now that the strongest students out there applying to some of these colleges is a total lottery play for many.
I'm going to give an example and make it really concrete. So I was talking to a student this week, 1560 on her SAT, very high grades, all rigorous courses, all that stuff. And she was really, really disappointed that she never got in Brown, early decision. Then she tried ED2 to another highly selective school. She never got in there. And she was really sad. And I started pointing to her the numbers. And I said, do you realize that for every 22 high schools in this country, only one kid gets into Brown? And it kind of was a little bit of comforting for her to realize, maybe it's not that I'm bad and there's something wrong with me. Maybe the competition is just really that fierce at that level. So I think that's a good point that you're bringing up, because that's not what I was thinking of my main takeaway, but I think that's actually a really good takeaway, Dave.
Well, and you make up this part a lot, Mark. I mean, copy your data. You also tell me How many high schools are there in the United States right now? Like 40,000?
43,000.
43,000. So if you add up the valedictorians and the salutatorians, that means
You
that
need to work
have
on your
almost
pronunciation of that word, by the way, dude.
Salut-
Salutatorians.
salut-
Salutatorians, man.
Salutatorians.
Went to your Diluvian age back then, Dr.
That's
Lincoln
right. Yeah, the also ran guys.
You know what they call it, just because I probably think a lot of people mess up? They just call it vowels and sals.
I like that.
But every time I do that, I'm like, man, that means I could have got you on Venetian's vernacular. I missed an opportunity to bust you.
No,
now you'll know it.
If you add up your Valley and Sally's, you're like 85,000 kids. And I forget how many kids get perfect on their SAT scores every year. Mark, what is that number?
Don't know that number off the top of my head. I should.
But it's in the thousands. It's in the thousands. But the point is, if you look at the fact that there are more than enough Valleys and Sallys and perfect SAT scores.
Vowels and Sals, by the way. Now you're going Valley Girl on me. Vowels and Sals.
Vowels and Sals. That you could easily fill up all of Harvard's class, for example, with salutatorians and valedictorians with perfect scores, if that was your...
No, Harvard has said that. They get 3 times more just perfect scores than their spots. And I can say this, the acceptance rate at Stanford for perfect test scores and 4.0 is around 20%. About 1 in 5 kids with perfect test scores and 4.0s get into Stanford.
And that would just blow my mind. I mean, and I would really feel for that kid who had perfect test scores and straight A average. And then and harping back to what your conversation was like last week, the dream crusher analogy is, imagine going to a kid who comes to you as a college counselor with a top heavy list, perfect scores, straight A average, and saying, kid, you got an 80% chance of being rejected. Why don't you readjust this list?
Well, I did that with a student I'm working with this year that was on pace to be valedictorian. Test scores, this is a different kid, not that 1560, but test scores actually almost identical to that, actually. And Stanford was the first choice. And if you heard last week's episode, I'm very honest with people. And I told them, listen, Stanford absolutely should be on your list. Go for it. You're interested, but I want to prepare you, and I don't want you to get your heart set on it, because, honestly, in that pace, I didn't necessarily know if the extracurriculars and some of those other things were going to make her competitive. And I just told her that it could absolutely happen, and I'm not telling you not to apply. I'm just telling you I want you to guard your heart. So, yeah, that's my job, and I have to do that, and it ended up not being, unfortunately, I was hoping to be wrong, it's not like I want to be right. But when the student didn't get in, I think that conversation helped to prepare her a little bit for it.
That's right. That's right. Mark graduated from Dream Crusher Academy.
Dave's not going to forget the students giving the Dream Crusher shirt to the college counselor in Virginia that I shared last week. He's been talking to me about that off air. I shared that at our KIP staff meeting, and then my boss said, I don't know what to say after that. That was just a drop the mic moment. Let's just end staff meeting right now.
Exactly.
So there's another reason, though, Dave, that I wanted us to talk about this article. And to me, this is really, really important. And it's because if parents don't understand what we're talking about, then they inevitably put unrealistic expectations and pressure on their kids. And it's completely understandable. If Northeastern is the school, you remember I read the article from Gus that he sent in 2 weeks ago. He said, while I pine for the days when Northeastern, helped a kid like me who didn't have it all together and gave me a chance, I'm so proud of what it's become. And I read his email that he said I could read. If you're thinking Northeastern was the school it was when you applied, then, you can just make these very innocent comments to your kids like, oh, well, let's throw Northeastern on the list. At least we know you're going to get in there. And then just imagine the devastation that happens to your kid. And one thing I want to say, and I cannot emphasize this enough, for all the research out there, and we've talked about this on this podcast, of how kids look to their peers as they get older for oftentimes primary sources of influence, kids never, ever, ever stop wanting to make their parents proud. And I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a client that I'm working with. I'll say this. She's in the state of Nebraska. And she's really done well in this college admissions process. Like, she's gotten a lot of acceptances, a very, very high percentage of acceptances. She had a really great list. She's in a lot of different schools. And so I was asking her, I said, so, how do you feel about your options? You know what she said? Take a guess what she said, Dave.
Probably something in reference to, I feel great, but my parents don't, or something.
No. She said, I really feel great because I feel like my parents are really proud of me.
There you go.
And so I bring that up because kids never, ever stop wanting to make their parents proud of them. And that's the primary reason I wanted to read this article, because I want parents to readjust their expectations for the results from their child, whether we're talking about a stretch school, a challenge, or a reach school, or if we're talking about a probable.
And I just want to interject how helpful, Mark, this was with our own daughter. You were so helpful for two reasons, because when I started the college process, I didn't know about this. I just thought getting into an Ivy was like when I got into Ivy decades ago. And so it was really shocking to me when you actually had to be really realistic and say, it's very hard. Your expectations are unrealistic, but more importantly, don't foist those expectations on your kids. The fact is you have to love them regardless. And then the other thing that you said was build a balanced list and make sure you love every single school on that list and really work to not just focus on the top, but focus on the solids and visit them and know that no matter what happens in this process, you as a parent will be proud of this list. And so often, if you communicate that to your child, that at the end of this process, no matter what happens, you will be fine and I will be proud, we would alleviate so much of the psychic stress that's occurring with these kids that are resulting in anxiety, suicide, depression, and so forth. So that's such an important message. And I remember, too, that when we built this list, Mark, and you expanded the possibilities, and we went out and visited some of those schools, I loved all those schools.
Yeah, you really did. Dave was like, I love Emory. I love Rice. I love Rice. Like, it was a bunch of different schools. You were loving all of them when you'd visit. Yeah.
In fact, my biggest thing is that my daughter didn't love the schools as much as I did, and some were like warm weather schools. And here
I know.
From Chicago.
I remember you loving Pomona.
That's right. We're in Pomona. It's January. It's 80 degrees. It's Chicago. It's like 20 below, and my daughter is still like, so it's sunny. And I'm like, are you crazy?
I want to visit. Get out of Chicago.
I don't want to visit you in some snowy climes. Let's take a look at Hawaii.
I had a call this week just to reinforce this, from a parent. And I'm not going to get into details of schools, but I really appreciate the transparency of the parent. And they were like, Mark, I think I made a big mistake. And I said, what's up? And they said, my daughter got in, and they named the name of the school. And it's actually one of these schools that's incredibly selective, but not everybody knows it. And I sort of said, oh, good, like in a ho-hum kind of way. And my daughter, and then the parent was like, my daughter said, that's it? Do you know how hard it was to get into that school? Do you know what the acceptance rate is? And you're just sort of like ho-hum about it. And he was being really honest with me, like, I feel really bad. And the point is, it's just really, really easy to do that in a really innocent way. Can be the most unbelievable, loving, dedicated parent in the world if you don't understand how these schools have changed.
Right.
Here's another example. UCSD, okay? University of California, San Diego. Go back 1986, 1160 was the median SAT score. Go to 2016, it's 1337. And then 2020, it's 1360. And keep in mind, there's a priority given to California residents, so you can expect it to be even harder out of state. So they have to keep, UC system has to keep a certain percentage of kids from California, be more than 25%.
I want to give a very popular choice. Remember, Mark, when we were going to school, that USC was known as the University of Second Choice.
Oh my goodness, USC is really tough.
And now USC is like the LA Ivy, and I was shocked.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, you mean people are willing to go to prison to get their kids into USC?
Hey, Dave, let me give you an example from this week. Another student I'm working with, valedictorian. And I'm not talking about valedictorian in class sizes of 20 or 30. I'm talking about, school sizes of 400 and 500. So I'm talking about valedictorian. I mean, student is going to be valedictorian, which basically means straight A's for all 4 years, right? And this is a student, they're in at Cal Berkeley, they're in at UCLA, even if they're out of state, they're in at schools like WashU, and other really competitive schools with, really, really strong student bodies, not in at USC. Just today, I did a session, the new student in Texas, and they forwarded me a letter they received from USC before the session. And this is what it says. We received nearly 71,000 applications for admission, but we only have capacity to enroll 3,200 students in our entering class. Now, this is the key line. Check this out. Of those offered admission, most achieved nearly straight A averages in a rigorous schedule of classes. So I know colleges are oftentimes trying to enhance their perception of selectivity, but those are some pretty compelling numbers. 71,000 applications, most with near straight A's,
Wow.
Wow. So we're talking about USC's pushing single-digit acceptance rates now. So, no longer University of Second Choice or Second Chance or all those little jokes you used to hear.
That's right. And I would like to make the point that USC is not on the beach, but that's okay. Well, how would you like to wrap this up, Mark?
No, I think people understand a way. I'd say parents, educate yourself so that you don't make the mistake of increasing your child's mental duress and their pressure. And like, they're not going to feel like you're proud of them if you're like, everybody gets into that school. And it can happen in a really innocuous way. And so, knowledge is power, and be mindful of it. I would encourage you to educate yourself on your own about the difference in selectivities that have happened at various schools, and so that you can apply appropriate comments in your interaction with your child and in your expectations for your child.
And I just want to close by doing a real shout out for the college spotlights, Mark. What are we up to in the college spotlights now?
72 or 73, and as soon as we finish the book chapter, we're going to go back to weekly on that too. So I know we're doing bi-weekly.
And there are
for next
so
week's.
many great colleges on that list. We're probably up to over 30 or 40 colleges that are colleges that your kid would love, that could be on any list of a medium and high performance child with a good chance of acceptance that does not apply here. So the fact is that you can build a list to be assured that no matter what happens in your process, your kid will get into a really amazing school that will get him where he needs to go. And so I really encourage people to focus on the college spotlights every week, because that's going to add to your knowledge base and help alleviate some of this stress.
And one thing I'll ask a favor of everyone, if you can share the college spotlights with your college counselor, your guidance counselor, because it's a great resource that they can share with their other students. And it's one of the reasons why I feel passionate about it. I can't wait till we get to 300, Dave. And literally, we can reach out to all the college counselors and guidance counselors and say, look, send this as a link to your students. So it takes time. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Anika, I'm happy to be in the great state of North Carolina.
And I'm happy to be in the great state of Georgia.
We just reversed roles. So I couldn't wave at you when I drove through Greensboro because you're like, I'm going to be in the ATL.
We waved at each other on the highway.
On the highway. I am doing podcasting out of a hotel, Fairfield Suites in Raleigh. Well, Cary, actually, which those from North Carolina know Cary, Raleigh, right next to each other. And before we get started, I'll tell you what, this email literally just came in. And I replied, I said, can I read this on the air? And that person said, I would be honored to.
Oh.
So this, for you to read it. So this comes from Prashant Segal. He is a listener in India. And listen to what he says. He says, hey, Mark, just heard the latest episode of the podcast. I wanted to congratulate you and Joy for picking NC State. It sure is an amazing choice. My son also got into NC State for the up and coming fall. For their first-year engineering program, got a very generous scholarship and financial aid offer, too. The only thing keeping him from committing is that he wants to study computer science, and they don't admit directly into that major. He'll have to go and perform well in pre-engineering in order to declare his preferred major of computer science. Then he says, hope you guys have a great time in Raleigh and would sure love to hear about your NC State experience on the next episode. So I said, hey, we're recording in 20 minutes. So I'll just say we're having an amazing time here. Joy's loving the campus, interacting with a lot of different students. You know, they're not doing official tours, and they don't do that for grad school anyway. So you got to use your informal network, you know, that can reach out to the students you know and do it that way. But she could not be more excited. You know, the NC State program she's in, Anika, clinical mental health counseling program, they had almost 300 applications for 24 spots. And why Joy liked it as her number one and why I like it is because she's passionate about serving marginalized communities, and she's passionate about social justice. And this particular program has a concentration on marginalized communities and social justice.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, and that's totally who she is. And the other thing is, some of the programs have more non-traditional students. God bless them for that, you know, second careers or whatever. But she's a single person in her 20s, and most of the people in her program are like women in their mid-20s who are full-time students. So it kind of creates a bond of these 24 going through as a cohort together, you know?
Very nice.
It's like her network, and yeah, so she's loving it, loving the campus. It's costing me some money in the bookstores. You know?
And you don't mind it.
Yeah, and then you know, we also went. I also got to visit Lisa on this trip because she's in Chapel Hill. We met on the Duke's campus. Met a couple of the students over there at Duke, and then headed to the bookstore. And of course, Joy and Lisa, you know, they could chit chat all day. Mental health. That was like good. And so it's all good. Love it here. Great weather. Beautiful state of North Carolina. Awesome.
Yay.
All right, before we dive in, Anika, you know we're doing this countdown. And I'm going to blow through the first category now because we had those 8 schools that are tied. And I'm talking about where Fortune 500 CEOs got their undergrad degree. So we had 8 schools tied with 5, all in the 10th spot. And that was Yale and New Haven, Illinois and Champaign, Bucknell and Lewisburg, Texas and Austin, Texas, Princeton and Princeton, Lehigh and Bethlehem, PA, SUNY Binghamton, of course, in Binghamton, and my alma mater, Michigan State University in East Lansing. Now we are into the next tier. Who had 6 CEOs? Well, there are 4 in this group, and kicking it off, we've got the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia coming in at 6. And probably not surprised about that, are you, Anika? That's
not quite.
Yeah, especially with the Wharton School there. So good for them. UPenn and Philly cracking the next list. We got a lot to share. Take it away. Oh, I take it away.
No, yeah.
I think by episode 167, I would know that.
Mark. Take it away, Mark.
I'll take it away. So for those of you who are new to our podcast, we're almost retiring this book. I wrote this book, 171 Answers. We've been going chapter by chapter and one episode each week. And when we get to 171, we're retiring the book. It will become a 4-section podcast, not a 5-section podcast. And so the final 8 chapters deal with, you're in college now, but we want you to graduate, and preferably in 4 years if it's a 4-year program. And so we're dealing with strategies to increase the chances that you will graduate. And this particular chapter looks at tapping into the resources that are on campus. And it looks at what are the most valuable resources on a college campus. So, Anika, you've read the chapter. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, I got a nice little list going here. So
good. Let me hear it.
I mean, so the first one that you really dive into are the academic success centers on campus.
Yes.
Like those are really like the I guess the central location for if you're having trouble, you find the success center because that's what it was. Yes. It is what it says. It wants you to be successful.
And they don't all have that same name. You know, I think that I love that name. I think it's a great name.
You did mention that. Yeah, they just all offer the same services that
Correct.
A traditional success center would offer, such as
let's talk about some of them.
Such as the tutoring, mentoring. Yep. You even mentioned money management in a doggone thing. So you know,
that's why I want to talk about this because I think when people I think a lot of people probably know, and even if they didn't know, we've mentioned it before, that colleges provide services like help with tutoring and help with writing. But I think a lot of people may not know the breadth of some of the different needs they're attempting to address. Like you mentioned, one of them there, money management. So you want to mention some of the others that I mentioned in here that, of course, not all colleges do, but a lot, you know.
Yeah, you did get some examples from some specific colleges, but it's still some of the examples included. Obviously, study strategies are in there. One was even whether or not to decide how to drop a class. Like, should I drop this class or not? dealing with academic stress. You go into mental health services, health and wellness services, and the one I love, the TRIO programs for our first gen students.
Yeah.
And just a couple more on here, and I'll let you, add some more depth in this. But we talked about the living and learning communities where, you have these very specific dorms set up where people, I guess, with similar majors where they come into, living together. And then the last one I want to mention is about freshman orientation. And you mentioned that, but to me, freshman orientation is kind of more of a mandatory thing, where these other things where the big takeaway for me was our kids have to be, self-initiators. Like they got to go after this stuff. So nobody's going to come knocking on their door saying, hey, get up and come on over to this thing and do this. But the freshman orientation, even though you mentioned in there, I know most times that's just like, you got to go to freshman orientation when you sign up, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. So I do think that's an important distinction. It's usually required. However, there's times when it's required and it's a big, huge, 1-day event at certain schools. Mm-hmm. And it's check in, once you've checked in, literally you could go check out and be out in the parking lot on your phone. Mm-hmm. Like it's not all a small group thing with, lots of accountability. That depends on the structure of your school. Okay. So I do see the distinction you're making between, is it required for you to go? Is it not required? In the majority of schools, it is required. Not all, but the overwhelming majority, it's required. But even when it is required, if it's not small group oriented, there's still an ability to just check out, and just be on your phone or even be out in the parking lot. So, but some of the other things that that are there, I'll share some of the workshops that Georgia Tech provides within their Academic Success Center. They've got a very strong center there. So they put a workshop on called How to Develop Grit and Resilience. Like, how important is that? They've got a guide to how to study for STEM courses. They've got, like, I think you mentioned whether to drop a class or not. Here's another one they put on. I'm late. I'm always late, dealing with procrastination. But that's a big deal, right? Like how many of us struggle with procrastination and have never really had skills and had teaching and instruction? Here's another great one, dealing with, anxiety and stress, Here's another one, prioritizing studying for finals. Okay. Here's another one, work smarter, not harder. How to form and work in a study group. So these are all specific workshops. And so I just want people in this, the purpose of this chapter is you really explore the resources. Like they are plentiful. They are abundant. And then I mentioned some other ones that we don't have whole chapters on, but there's multicultural resources as well, that schools have. So you want to check out, schools have an entire department directed to multicultural education in most schools. That's really common, right? You mentioned before first gen and resources that are available for first gen. That's really, really important. So, if you're a multicultural student, make sure you check out the resources that are available for multicultural students. Make sure you check out the first gen resources. And then another really important one is disability services. And so that's really important. And I think sometimes when people think disability, they tend to think of maybe somebody who, has lost a limb or something. And, but disability services is very broad, and it includes all learning differences. Mm-hmm. It includes support for, the student that's got dysgraphia or dyslexia, or that's got ADD or got ADHD. Like this is a sizable portion of the population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you consider learning differences and physical differences, I don't know any study on this, but I'll bet we're talking about 40% of the population, mm-hmm. that would fall into one of those categories. So you want to check out all the resources that are there. I just talked to a student this week about that, a parent this week about that. Like, make sure that you check out the support resources that are available on each of the colleges your child is in, given your child's learning difference. And then another thing that I talk about here, which is important, which is the Office of International Students, Office of International Student Center, and they have different names as well, right? And I talked about some of the things. I actually included the mission statement from Michigan State. It said the mission of the Office of International Students and Scholars is to provide support to Michigan State University's international students and scholars and families. And then it talks about some of the services included there, which are things like really important things like making sure you're in compliance with the immigration regulations, specific international orientations and special programming for international students to help integrate international students into the academic, cultural, and social life of the school, serving as a liaison with the U.S. government and the agencies and foreign embassies and sponsors and educational foundations that help when it comes to all that processing, because there's a whole lot that has to happen with getting your student visa. And friends, if you heard my interview with Nancy Bean, the former president of NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counselors, she emphasized two things every student should do on their campus visit, and I can't emphasize it enough. One is get to the Career Center, even as prospectives get to the Career Center, let alone as incoming students. As freshmen, you should be visiting the Career Center and figuring out what resources are available to you for each of your 4 years. It'll make a huge difference in your employability or your grad school applications. And then also the study abroad opportunities. Meet a study abroad coordinator, counselor, advisor, and find out what your options are. Those are two must resources, in my opinion, that every student should take advantage of. So those are just some of the things that, that I think are really important. And most importantly in this is becoming an initiator. Like you said, if you don't initiate, you're going to miss out on all kinds of. This is not the place where you can expect everybody to just bang your door down and say, are you using all these things? So any other comments, Anika?
Nope. Just do it.
Just do it. Hey, by the way, that was good advice for me on my physical therapy. You're like, just do it. Remember I said, have you have any experience in physical therapy? Right. And you know what I learned about physical therapy? I don't want to do it, but it really helps. So when I'm in the middle of doing it, I do all these. I do 50 minutes a day.
Wow.
And of course, I hate to say this, but I started out amazing, never missing. And then, next thing you know, you get into some bad habits. So I'm sort of starting to get back to my good self, not my bad self. But sometimes I'm doing these stretch exercises and I'm supposed to do them until the pain level on a 1 to 10 hits a 5 or 6. So when it's in that 5 to 6 range and I'm like, I don't like this. And what's in the back of my head? Stop. Anika's voice saying, just do it. Just do it, like she's a Nike branding commercial.
Well, do it, Mark. Keep going. You got it.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Anika. So we have another fantastic question from the same Courtney in college counseling in New England at a boarding day school that asked last week's great question. So I want to dive into it because it's got a lot of complexity and nuance to answer it right.
Okay, it reads, I appreciated your recent discussion of need blind versus need aware admissions, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how truly need blind any school can actually be. According to many of the elite need blind private school common data sets, they consistently show that the percent of students on need-based aid on their campus hovers roughly between 45 to 55% each year, meaning that there's around 45 to 55% of students that are completely paying the full amount. And even if admissions doesn't see any actual financial aid information or applications, they can clearly see zip codes, educational backgrounds of parents and high schools attended. Do you truly believe schools when they say they're need blind? Mark Stucker?
All right, let's break it down. Now, I'm going to warn you, my answer is going to be different from what you're going to hear from most colleges. And it's also going to be different from what you hear from most independent college counselors. But the best way to do this is to unpack this is to break down what colleges claim into 3 different categories. And so I want to break down what they claim into 3 categories. And I want to go back and examine those 3 categories and those claims and whether or not they're accurate. Okay. One of the things we pride ourselves on this podcast is really pulling back the curtain and letting you sort of see how the sausage is made. So the first claim is that a college is need blind. And what does need blind mean? What do you think it means, Anika, to be need blind?
It means that we don't care if you can pay or not. We're going to just look at you as a student and see if you're going to thrive here. And see if we want to accept you, basically.
Correct. Exactly. So what it means is that the admission process, applicants are judged solely on their merits, irrespective of their ability to pay tuition, as far as acceptance, how the acceptance process works, just admissions. Okay. And the opposite of need blind is need aware, also called need conscious, also called need sensitive. So you'll hear some say we're need aware, we're need conscious, we're need sensitive. That means the opposite. It means we do sometimes look at the ability to pay, and that can determine who is admitted and not admitted. So here's the first thing I'm going to say but it's pretty controversial. Most colleges are need blind, Anika. The majority are need blind, and you can look up, and there's all these articles from all of these different independent consulting companies that say the 102 need blind schools, the 57 need blind schools, the 32 need blind schools. So that's the first controversial thing that I'm going to say. Does that surprise you?
Not necessarily, I don't guess.
Yeah, the majority of schools are need blind, regardless of what people say. Now, I'm going to come back and define that a little differently, I think, than what people think that means. I mean, when I say that they need blind, because notice I did not say that most colleges claim that they will meet your need. And so that's an extremely important distinction,
right? Which
I want to talk about more later, right? So there's being need blind, meaning do we look at your ability to pay when you apply versus if you have a financial need, we're going to meet it. And those two are completely different. And what happens in some of the articles that you'll read is that people conflate those two. And when they say who's need blind, they're really asking who doesn't look at ability to pay and gives me the money I need to be able to attend. Mm-hmm. And that's why the confusion comes in. But it's very important that we emphasize those are separate. So I can remember a student that had a 0 EFC, which basically means that when a family fills out the financial forms, the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, or in some cases the profile that some private colleges with larger endowments use, they deem that this is not a family that can pay anything because the amount of money that they make, income and assets, it looks at the income and assets of the students and parents, means that they just need any resources that they have coming in just for subsistence, just for food and shelter and utilities and transportation. And so there's no ability to pay for college. And this student applied, particular student I'm thinking about, applied to LSU University and they were admitted. And, they got a bill for about $50,000. Yeah. Pays for $50,000. I will argue that that's what most schools do that are need blind. They're need blind with no promise at all to meet your full financial need. All right. So that's category one. Now, the next category is all the way to the other extreme. So let's talk about that. And I can tell this is what Courtney really is getting at if you look at her questions, because, look at what she actually says. And this category is all the way on the other extreme. And these are colleges that claim to be need blind, but also claim to meet a family's financial need. All right. This is the holy grail. And it's a short list of schools. In fact, I can tell you right now, as of this recording, we have 43 schools that fit in that bucket, Anika, that claim to be need blind and claim to meet 100% of an applicant's financial need. And there's such a short list, I'm going to blow through them. Amherst, Barnard, Boston College, Bowdoin Brown, Caltech, Claremont, McKenna, College of the Holy Cross, Columbia, Cornell, Curtis Institute of Music. This is all alphabetized. Dartmouth, Davidson, Duke, Georgetown, Grinnell, Hamilton, Harvard, Harvey-Mudd, Johns Hopkins, MIT, Middlebury, Northwestern, Olin, Pomona, Princeton, Rice, Soka University, Stanford, Swarthmore, University of Chicago, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Notre Dame, UPenn, Richmond, USC, the one in Southern California, not the one in South Carolina, University of Virginia, Vanderbilt, Vassar, Wellesley, Williams, and Yale. Such a short list, I could just blow through it. It's actually 42. So that's what I know. This is what Courtney is really getting at in her question, because if you notice, she goes on and says, if you look at these schools, like I'll read it actually what she says. According to these elite private need blind schools, they consistently show the percentage of students on need-based campuses hovers around 40 to 55%, meaning that 40 to 55% are completely full pay. So this is the group that she's really primarily talking about. So that's the second group. I just want to say what their claim is first, okay? And then there's the third group. And this group claims that, no, we're not need blind, but we will meet your family's need. So if we admit you, we may sometimes not admit a student because we can't afford to fund you. But if we admit you, we will fund you, and we will provide your financial need. This is how, when I did boarding school admissions, this is how it worked. Anika. Like, we didn't promise any single person that walked through the door we would meet your full financial need. But we did promise if we admit you, we will meet your full financial need without loans. There'll be no loans, and we'll meet your full financial need. But we got to the point where the money ran out. When the money ran out, some people were not admitted. But as long as we had the money, we admitted you, and we did it, with your full financial need without loans. Now, once again,
wait. So just to be clear, are you saying that we see that you can't really pay, but we want you so bad, we're going to give you some money when you get here? But we see that you can't pay. It could be a same case in that school where we see that you can't pay and we really can't afford you. Is that what that is?
No. So let's make it tangible with an example. An applicant applies, and let's say the cost is $60,000, which is about right? So let's say the cost is $60,000 to attend, and let's say an applicant applies. So an assessment is done by an outside instrument agency to determine how much the family can pay. The family doesn't have the ability to come to you and say, "I can afford to pay $2,000, give me $58," It doesn't work that way. So objective assessment is done as to how much a family can afford. And we can talk, it's another conversation for another day, whether that objective assessment is fair. I would argue that it's really not. It's very onerous and expects too high a percentage of your discretionary money to have to go to education, but that's neither here nor there. It is what it is. So the objective assessment is done. Let's say the objective assessment comes back and says you can afford to pay $10,000, right? And the cost is $60,000. So a school that meets full need is going to get you $50,000 because you have a need of $50,000, 60 minus 10. And so if we admit you, we're giving you the $50,000 because that is your need. Schools that meet full need feel it's cruel to admit people and not meet their financial need. So they would rather not admit than admit people and not meet their need. So if they admit you, they will meet your financial need. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Now, this is a very important thing to keep in mind. When people think of financial aid, they immediately think of grants and scholarships. Financial aid is grants and scholarships, loan, and campus employment. It's all three. So meeting your need is going to typically mean about an average of $67,000 in Stafford federal loans over 4 years. An average of about $6,700 a year. It's not parceled out that way. It's $5,500 the first year, $6,500 the second year, $7,500 the third year, $7,500 the fourth year, and it could be up to another $4,000 if you needed a fifth year. But it's an average of $6,700. That's the easy way to think about it over 4 years. So that's typically going to be in the package, and you can expect campus employment of around $2,500. So there's going to typically be $9,200 on average, and this is on average, of what we call self-help. That's self-help. So that's money, but it's self-help, right? Because it's a campus job and it's a loan. So that's part of meeting that need. I just want to make that clear. But these colleges believe that it's not fair or humane for us to admit student and not meet their financial need. But the reason why they're saying they're not need blind is because they feel like they can't. It would be erroneous. It would be deceitful to claim that they are, because they're not, and they're just not, and they don't want to make a claim that they know is not true. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just trying to experience that. So if I'm a kid that can't afford it, you may not accept me because you just feel like I'm not, like you might find some other kid that's a little more competitive than me and they can pay a little bit more, or I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how that's.
So can I table your question? Because I have a part of my presentation that just fits in perfectly. And you kind of got ahead of me by being so
sure
sharp or whatever word. I want to answer your question so badly, but not right.
Okay, I'm just going to hush. Keep going.
Yeah. No, I want you to hush. I'm going to resuscitate it at the right time. Okay. So now that we know the three categories, right? The first category is no, we're not need blind. Okay. The second category is we're need blind and we meet full need. And the third category is that we're not need blind and we do meet your need. Now let's take a look at all three of them and let's evaluate who's being completely honest and truthful with you. That's really Courtney's question. I just wanted to set the context so people know the three big categories. So the first group that says, no, we're not need blind, they're being completely truthful with you because they don't claim to meet your need. And I will argue what matters most to you as an applicant is not whether or not they're need blind, but whether or not they'll meet your need. That's what should matter to you. If I have a financial need, will they help me with it? The first group doesn't pretend to do that. That's why the story about LSU made sense. We don't even claim to meet full need. Most public schools are need blind. Most public schools don't look at ability to pay. But that doesn't mean they're giving you the money you need. So most schools, and not just public schools, most private schools do the same thing. They're need blind. In other words, the majority of admission officers are not saying, we can't admit this person, they have too big of a need. That's not what happens in the minds of most admission officers. They don't. They evaluate the person, decision is made, and then the award goes out. But here's what most schools do. They do what's called gapping. And gapping is there's a gap between what your real need is and what the school gives you. So let's go back to that illustration I gave before. School costs $60,000. Let's say the school gives you $30,000, Anika. And once again, when I say gives you 30, that's a combination of the self-help of the loan, the campus employment. We'll call that 10,000 just to make a nice round number. So you get 10,000 in campus employment and a loan, and then they give you a $20,000 scholarship, that's free money that we call gift aid that doesn't have to be repaid. Okay? Now, you really had a need of 50 because the cost is 60, and according to your expected family contribution, you can pay 10. 10 minus 60 is 50. You have a need of 50. They gave you 30. 50 minus 30 is 20. They gapped you by 20. You got gapped by 20. That's what we call gapping. Gapping is the difference between what you get and what you need. So I will say that most colleges that are need blind, they are, they claim to be need blind. They actually genuinely are. They just gap you. And now you have a big problem. You have to either get a GoFundMe going, hit up everybody do Parent Plus loans, private loans, something like that. Take on a third job, change your lifestyle, tap home equity, sell your home. I mean, all kinds of things, right? Okay, so that's assessment of the first group. I think, but in fairness to them, it's truth in advertising. Like, they don't claim to meet full need. They just say, we're need blind, but they don't promise that they're meeting your need. And I will argue what really matters is, do they meet your need?
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
All right, let's get to the second category. The second category is that group of 42 schools that says we are need blind and we meet full need. Now, let me give some background and context. I had Peter Van Buskirk on the podcast about a year and a half ago, VP of Enrollment at Franklin and Marshall University, been in the admissions business for 50 years now. And Peter and I used to have lots of debates behind the scenes with each other. And he used to say to me, Mark, I don't believe there's any such thing as a need blind school in the country. And I used to say, well, I knew a whole lot of schools that claimed they were need blind really weren't. But I kind of said, well, I don't necessarily know if I agree with you. I think some schools are need blind. And we would go back and forth debating it. And as I debated more and more and more with him, he won that debate, Anika. He completely convinced me that he is right. I do not believe that these schools that claim they're need blind, which is Courtney's question, truly are need blind. Now you say, well, that doesn't make sense. And I'll tell you why. If we had an admission officer in front of us, Anika, that was at one of these need blind schools, and they could have been there for 30 years, they would swear over and over and over that they are not looking at ability to pay when they make a decision and our school meets need. So you're saying, well, what gives? Why are you saying they're not? So this is why. And this is where Peter got me in his thinking. He's like, if you're need blind, that is an absolute statement and it has to apply in all instances. In other words, there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not, right? It's true. Wouldn't you agree? You're a mom. You've had 3 kids. Is that fair?
Kind of pregnant, but yeah, no.
I'm not talking about showing a little and all that. You're either pregnant or you're not. So here's the reality. If you really look at the fine print, Anika, for these schools that claim that they're need blind, they will say things like, we are not need blind when it comes to going to our wait list. In other words, oftentimes when they go to the wait list, they only go for full pay students. They'll say, we've run out of financial aid, so we're going to the wait list for people that can pay. That's very common.
Okay.
Here's another thing. We're not need blind for transfer students. So we may be need blind for first year admissions applicants, but we're not need blind as a transfer student. We look at, can you pay?
Okay.
That's very common for these schools on that 43 schools I mentioned to be not need blind for wait lists and to not be need blind for transfer students. And here's a really big one. And this is the majority of them. We're not need blind for international students. We're only need blind for domestic students. So Peter's point, which I agree, it's the whole, you can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't be need blind and say, well, I got this exception over here. I got this exception over here. And I got this exception over here. I got this exception over here. Furthermore, I will argue that these schools that claim to be need blind intentionally go to affluent areas to recruit. Now, it's partly because they do get a lot of really good applicants there, and they have a long track record of getting great applicants there. So it's smart. You know, if you want to catch bass, you go where the bass are. But it does skew your applicant pool if you're focusing on targeting affluent areas. Like these schools could not afford to say, yeah, we're need blind and we meet full need, and we're going to do most of our recruitment in underserved neighborhoods. They could not afford to do that.
Right.
So their recruitment is only way that they can even possibly make that claim, even for first-year students, let alone waitlist transfer and international students. Okay? Now, this is another point Peter brought up in my interview with him when we talked about this. He said nonprofit institutions, which all these schools claim to be, right? He said they have to submit their operating budgets to the federal government, and they cannot show that they're bringing in more money than they're spending. And one of the absolute largest line items in their budget is financial aid. And there's no way in the world you can ignore the largest item in your budget and have it swing from like 150 million to 250 million from one year to the next without somewhat controlling that line item. So let's talk about why they claim this then. Well, they claim it because, one, it's usually true for first-year admissions. So you can say it is a true statement for first-year freshman admissions for these schools. And that's what they're thinking of as admissions. So that is, in effect, a fair claim for a lot of them, right? Although I will still argue that they are targeting where they travel to go to affluent neighborhoods. If they didn't do that, they couldn't even claim it for first-year admissions. But the other reason is, think about the opposite of this, Anika. To not be need blind, do you realize how insulting that is to a student and a parent? Like, and to not meet needs? So you're sitting to an audience, and when an audience finds out that, so wait a minute, so you're looking at my wallet, and my wallet is determining if my kid gets in? People don't like that. It pisses them off. And so there's an incredible amount of pressure to not say that. Like, that really does not go over well at information session or at a fair. And the other thing that doesn't go over well is, you know what? You might have a need of 40,000, but we're only going to give you 20. We're not going to give you that. You're going to have to come up with that on your own. So, one, there is incredible pressure from the population not to say that.
Okay.
And the second thing is there's kind of a status in being part of this group of 42 schools. And you know how they say you're judged by the company you keep?
All right.
People like the idea of being thrown in the same group with the Stanfords and the Dukes and the Northwesterns and the Pomonas and the schools that meet full need. Like that's part of how colleges elevate their status. Yeah, we're part of this group. And one of the things that this group does, and look, God bless these schools. There's some of the best schools in the country, some of my favorite schools that have done my kids really, really, really well over the 21 years I've been doing this. But there is a little bit of self-righteousness from these guys. And Peter points this out. This is what he said when I interviewed him. He says, you know what? We're kind of doing it the right way. Watch out for the rest of those guys who don't meet full need or who are not need blind. And one of the things that it bothers me about this group is that this group of schools tends to have low numbers of Pell Grant recipients. So yeah, we meet full demonstrated need for first-year students only. Yeah, we're need blind, but if you look at the percentage of students that get Pell Grants, it's less than half of the population at large. 39% of students get Pell Grants. Very, very few of these schools have 20% of kids getting Pell Grants. Very few. In fact, some of them are in the single digits, like 9%, 7%, 11%.
Wow.
You know, there's a big movement out right now that's growing in momentum that is saying that schools will not get any Title IX money from the government at all if they don't have at least 15% at Pell Grant. And there's over 90 of these private schools that would lose their federal money because they're below 15% Pell. So while they can sort of have a little bit of, we do it the right way, we're not like, the others. I mean, they don't come out and say, watch out for those guys. That's subtle, right? It's like, we meet 100% of need. We are need blind. So you can apply here and not worry about money at all. But the fine print is we travel to wealthy neighborhoods. It doesn't apply to transfers. It doesn't apply to wait lists. It doesn't apply to international students. And some of them have other conditions as well. Like if you read the fine print, it might say it only applies to in-state students. Or sometimes it only applies to specific programs that they have. So there's a lot of fine print that invalidates it from being legitimate. But it's such a powerful thing from a recruitment standpoint, and people love to be in that club of these 42 schools because they are the most prestigious schools in the country and the wealthiest schools in the country. And so being in that club is a status thing. And also, the public doesn't want to hear you're looking at my ability to pay or you're not going to meet my need. Like, what are you talking about? So they don't want the backlash and they want the status. So they manipulate it a little bit, and it really is true for first-year students only. And that's why I think it's not valid. Is that questions? I've been talking a lot. Thoughts?
No, it's all clear. It makes sense now. So it's all good.
So the last group, to me, they're doing it the right way for the most part, right? They are meeting a need, and they're being honest about the fact that they're not need blind for everybody. And they're being honest. And I'll tell you, this has been really, really painful. So what I'll mention a few schools in this last group, Anika. Back in 1993, Carleton said we can no longer say we're need blind anymore, but we're going to meet full demonstrated need. And it was super painful for them to make that announcement.
But why?
Super painful. Because then people say, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? You're going to look at my wallet and that determines? And what people don't understand is that doesn't happen for every single applicant. It only happens usually for a smaller amount of applicants at some of these schools, especially the wealthier ones.
On what side of the economic spectrum are we talking about?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well,
I also told you to table your question. I don't know if I answered it or not, but I wanted to come back to it. Did I?
Well, you said it. You said that only applies to a certain amount, specific students. So are you talking about the kids that can't afford to go there, or are you talking about for the kids that can't afford to go there?
No. So I'm talking about okay, let's talk about you're not need blind. So that by definition means some people are not going to get in because of ability to pay, right? So that doesn't mean every single person is looked at, and if you don't have an ability to pay, you're not admitted. Schools do it differently. There are some schools that don't give awards to people that have really large needs. And if you have a really large need, you're unlikely to be admitted. But a lot of schools do it differently. They'll look at their lowest ranked applicants. Let's say they go through, they read everything comes back. They read need blind first. They read everything need blind. And they come back, and these are the people they want. And then the financial aid office says, guess what? We're $500,000 over budget. We have to make cuts. So how do they make cuts? Some schools look at, well, did we rate the highest? Let's go with the ones we rated the highest. And the ones that barely squeaked into the admissions, we'll push them to the wait list. Other schools, Wesleyan being an example, they look at who they're most likely to yield. They have sophisticated ways of assessing this. And they look at which students are most likely to come. And the ones that are not most likely to come, will waitlist them. So they don't do it for everybody, but they need to come up with $500,000. Do you do it based on your lowest ranked applicants? Do you do it based on who's most likely to come and not likely to come? Or do you do it based on who has a really, really large need? And where I was at, like I said, we met full demonstrated need without loans, but we were not need blind. And when we were way over budget, we usually did go to really large awards. We would say, you know what, we're 500,000 over. We can take 10 kids that we were giving 50,000 to and waitlist them because, that's just the easiest way to do it. And I was in there fighting like crazy for those kids, and I won sometimes and I lost sometimes. I got some bruises from it. So questions, Anika?
I feel like this is more of the counseling side as the parenting side. I don't know. It's just so much to consider when as a parent and you got your kid, we're just looking for schools that we can possibly afford to get to.
Correct.
I can't manage all of that in my brain when I'm trying to find my kid a college. Like,
you're of course talking about doing it on your own without counseling. What I mean? I worked with you and guided you through the process, and you kids also had boarding school college counselors, so we worked in conjunction with each other.
Right.
So you didn't have to manage it, but you're talking about the person that doesn't have that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Independent
to
or that.
Sort through all of that.
Yeah, it is. And so, the first thing you want to do is prioritize who meets your need, who is willing to meet your need. And then if it's a good school, apply and see whether or not you get in. I mean, if they're need blind, that might knock you out. But as long as you know if they're going to meet your need, if you get in, then what you're should be mostly concerned about is it affordable. But one of the things I wanted to mention is over the last 10, 12 years, there have been a number of schools, Anika, that have come out and said, can't do it anymore. Can't do it anymore. Can't claim that we're need blind. We're either jumping through hoops to try to do it, or we haven't been authentic with the public all along. We've been saying it. Because once again, the public hates to know that you're looking at ability to pay, and they hate to know you're not going to meet need. And they also want to be able to be in that club. There's a lot of status and stature to be part of that elite group of schools that do this. But there have been a number of schools that have come out and said, nope, can't do it anymore. It's been always really, really controversial when they've done it. I told you Carleton did it in 93. McAllister did it in 2006. Although when McAllister did it, this is a quote they said. At the end of the day, the single most important thing is who do you actually have on campus, said Brian Rosenberg, president of McAllister. If you have a need blind policy, but 3/4 are full pay students, are you really doing more to provide access than a situation that's need aware, but has 80 to 90% of students who are receiving aid? And I would agree with that. It's better to be need aware and meet the needs of those who come than to say I'm need blind and to say I meet need, but most of the people are wealthy and you're not really helping the access issue. But Wesleyan made a big announcement in 2013, and that grew a lot of backlash. They said we're no longer going to claim we're need blind. We just can't do it in full integrity. Haverford College did it in 2018. And I remember it was about 7 years ago, Grinnell announced that we're about to move away from our need blind policy. And boy, the alumni almost burned the building down. Burn the campus down. Because that from the public, that sounds like, are you serious? That goes against everything we believe. We're now going to look at people's ability to pay. So it's very humbling when a school comes out and makes this announcement. But I always celebrate them because you know what I know? All they're doing is being completely honest. Now, I will say this. Some of these schools that say, we meet full need and we're need aware, some of them still don't say, but we don't do it for transfers, international, wait lists, and all that. But hopefully that helps. So to answer Courtney's question, no, they're not need blind completely. They're mostly talking about first year freshman admissions, and there's no way they can completely be need blind because of the financial reporting that has to happen, and that's too big of a line item in their budget without them having some controls over it. So it's partial truth, but not full truth is the answer.
That was the short answer.
Yeah, that was like 30 minutes broken down in one sentence. But I'm Mark Stucker. I can't do one sentence. I wouldn't be who I am.
And there it all is for you, Courtney, and everybody. But no, that was fantastic. That was very helpful, though, seriously. But it's still a lot. It's just like, oh, gosh, geez.
But you bring a good point up. There's a lot to process. And so I think for most people, this is my advice for people. If you're concerned with whether a school is going to meet your financial need, don't worry whether they're need blind or not. Just apply, because most of the time, if they're need sensitive and need aware, it won't impact a lot of their, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to not get in. What you should be concerned about is if I do get in, will they meet my need? Now, here's what I will say. You want to ask a college a really hard question? Oh, colleges aren't going to like this one. I'm going to throw it out there. say, I've noticed that you're need aware. How does that actually apply? Does that mean that you are need aware for people with large EFCs? I mean, with low EFCs that have big financial needs? Does that mean you're need aware for people who are more of your lower rated applicants? Does that mean that you're need aware for people who you don't think are going to come? How does need aware, how do you determine when you're need aware and when you're not need aware?
And
they'll be like, man, that's like the question Courtney asked me last week. That was a doozy. This one was an easier one.
Oh,
you know
really?
what? Before I leave, I do want to make one last comment about. So going back to Courtney's question last week, one thing that I never commented, I just kind of brushed it over. So she said in that question, she said one thing that makes it particularly hard. For those of you who didn't listen, Courtney asked a really probing question about how do you handle giving people disappointing news about their college list if you, from your experience and your knowledge of things, know that they have a lot of schools on their list they're not likely to be admitted at, and they're not necessarily receptive to hearing that from you, that they need to change it and add more probables. And then she added at the very end the question, my situation is compounded because I'm white. And a lot of times, with students of color, I don't want them to think this white lady doesn't believe in me. So one thing that makes this even harder, Anika, is after the George Floyd thing broke out, all across the country, all over the country, these lists started emerging. I don't know if you heard about these, but people call them like blacklists. So what happened is particularly African Americans on message boards were sharing all of the experiences that they had at their independent schools where they experienced racial insensitivity. And they were all over. Like, I'd hear all these stories all over the country from, amazing schools, bad schools, in between everything. Like, people were just using it as an emotional catharsis to cleanse themselves and heal. And it was almost became like an affinity group of shared experiences as people were going through their cleansing from they're trying to emotionally heal from scars they had from their school. And one of the common things that was popping up on these message boards was my white counselor didn't give me brand name school on their list, and they gave that to other people, and that was extremely hurtful. So I am very sympathetic to the predicament that white counselors are in working with students of color and not wanting to make them think that they don't believe in them as a person and that there might be a racial angle there. And that's why I said that question was almost so hard, so hot to handle. The only way that I can answer that for her is to say, try to find another person of color that you can partner with, and you're both delivering the same message together, and they know it's not only coming from you. That's the only way I know how to handle that, because I realize, particularly right now, that's such a hot topic that that's the only answer I have. Sorry. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but, see you again next week. And are you going to be back in here and I'm going back there?
Yeah, switcheroo.
When you coming back to North Carolina?
Actually, sometime today, I think.
Oh, gee. Well, I'm coming back tomorrow. Joey's got more apartments to visit. My daughter has expensive taste, by the way. We visited this one place, and I nixed this thing. This guy's dressed in a tuxedo. He's like,
what?
Yeah, it's all 5-star, all this stuff. You got a private movie theater and all this stuff.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Yeah, and then the price came, too, and I'm like, you thinking you're getting any help with that? Sorry. I had to give my daughter a lecture about the budget, just like I do about schools. Stay within your budget. This is not how do I go to Raleigh and live 5-star lifestyle. You're going to grad school. Sorry, Joy.
Oh, they get confused so quickly.
They do. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, hopefully you heard the first part of my interview with Julia Hutchinson, and you understand why I'm so excited about this interview. I love any time we can have an interview that really takes you behind the scenes and lets you know how to really get to know the culture of a school. And so Julia picks up in part 2, and she talks about who's in these Snapchats and these Zoom sessions that she's in. And she talks about how the relationships get forged in them. And she also talks about things that she learned in these chat sessions that totally revolutionized her college search. And then she walks a student through how to actually get one started yourself if this is what you want to do. Listen and enjoy. So let's dig a little deeper. So are the people on these Zoom Snapchat sessions, are these current students? Are these applicants? Are these admitted students who got admitted early who have already, deposited and they're planning on coming? Is it a mixture of all of them? Like, who? Go in a little more depth on the composition of who's actually in these sessions.
Yeah, so in ZME, anybody can join, I think, that's interested in the school. And therefore, anybody that's interested in the school can also join the Snapchat group chat. So as far as I know, there aren't any current students in any of those groups, but some applicants, some people that have committed, and then I think it was just kind of an honor system, but people were very respectful about if they got rejected from the school, maybe leaving the group, or nobody ever entered the group that wasn't actually interested in the school and learning more about other people. So I felt like that worked very well, even though there wasn't any kind of guidelines for it.
Okay, so these are all either applicants or prospective applicants. And so are they all class of 2021, or could there be like a ninth grader in there, or a random middle schooler? Like what was like the age composition? Did it feel like it was all like the senior class? I mean, talk to us about that.
That's a good question. I never even thought about that. Yeah, it was only the senior class in those. I'm not sure how it works on ZME with who's allowed. Maybe, I can't remember, but maybe if you make an account, you have to enter what grade you're in or something, and maybe it puts you in a chat based on that. I can't totally remember back to when I made an account last fall, but it was only seniors.
All right, they're all seniors, a mixture between some that have been admitted already and some that are probably regular admission and they're hoping to be admitted.
Yes.
Okay. And were the dynamics similar between Snap and Zoom, or were they different?
Yeah, they were very similar. Sometimes people would log on to Zoom and we would all just sit there and not know what to talk about, but we found different like current events, or someone's cat would come in, or we'd start talking about that, or we'd all like go around and introduce ourselves usually at the beginning and just talk about some of our interests, but just based on what's going on in the world, we were always able to find things to talk about and just have a very casual conversation.
I mean, one benefit I immediately see to this, and I believe I've shared this on the podcast before, but when I did boarding school admissions, we used to interview all the applicants. Admission officers were. And my favorite question was, what is your biggest fear? And I learned after asking that question about 15 times that most people's biggest fear is a social fear. And the way I would summarize it, the answer would be this: am I going to like them, and are they going to like me? And that was the number one answer I got. And so one of the benefits to this is you're already starting to build a little bit of community. And I'm sure there were people in there that had committed, right? Were some of the people that had been admitted by early decision that knew they were going to the schools?
Yes, there were.
Yeah. So immediately, okay, this person's nice, but they're legitimately going to be at this school. And so if you kind of like them, and you said sometimes you might even private message, I can see the benefit of how that can make a school feel welcoming and a safe space, because, I've already met a few people that I think I might want to hang out with, or at least I will come in knowing somebody. Did you feel there was some of that effect to the groups or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I've already found so many friends from all different schools, really, that I keep in touch with regularly, and I would say I'm pretty close with some that I've been talking to for quite a while now, and people that definitely would be people that I would want to hang out with in college and spend time with.
So that's major. I mean, we could stop the interview right now, and that would be a huge reason to take advantage of this process. So that in of itself is invaluable. But I want to go to the next level, because one thing I know from talking with you, Julia, is that you found that you almost could discern a different kind of student was going to the different schools on your list. And that was one way that it helped you figure out what type of kids you might identify more with that were drawn to particular schools. Can you shed some light on that? Because there's no doubt in my mind our listeners will find this very interesting.
Yeah, not exaggerating at all. This completely revolutionized, I think, my college search and what I think about all of the schools. Because, I mean, when you find information about schools, you look at their website, you look at maybe different material that they give you or put out. You tour, you see all of the buildings and features and hear about different opportunities they have. But to a degree, all the schools are kind of similar when you research through that way, because they're always going to try to show you the most positive things, and they all have pretty similar, maybe they have like a new science building, or they have this or that internship opportunity, but I feel like you didn't really get an idea of what it would be like to go to the school. So before I started contacting people this way, I really had no idea what school would actually be the best fit for me. They all just seemed pretty good, but I wasn't really sure what my personality would match with. And once I got to know some of these students, I definitely saw that I connected with students from specific schools more than other schools. Specifically, Occidental College, I really felt like I matched with the students better than any other school. I felt like they had each student had a wide range of interests and passions, and they were all wanting to pursue all of those things in college and not just the one thing that they were majoring in. I also felt like they were all very artistic and viewed the world in a very creative and community-oriented way, I guess, and also that they just seemed to have a lot of depth. And I really felt like relationships with these people would be very enriching and something that would make me a better person. And that's really what made Oxy my top school. It was not my top school at all before I started to talk to people over social media. And afterwards, I felt like I really connected with the people and that there would be a really amazing community for me to be in.
That's just fantastic. And it sounds like none of the other sources you looked at gave you that lens into the student body to the same extent that just having conversations with the type of kid that's going and recognizing what they value, what they care about, how they see the world, what their interests are, aligned more closely with you than the other schools on your list. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't think has been any other way that I've seen that lets you get to know the school from that lens. And I think it's really valuable because a college should be a community and somewhere where you're learning and interacting with people outside of the classroom as well as in.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, imagine if you took our college spotlights and instead of making them 30 minutes, you made them 60 minutes. And imagine if you showed pictures of campus the whole time, full color pictures. And imagine if we interacted with 8, 10, 12 students. Well, that's exactly what Amazon Prime is doing on a new series, a video series that's offered on Amazon Prime called The College Tour. And that's our recommended resource for the week. Hosted by Alex Boylan. Each episode attempts to tell the story of what it's really like to be on campus with great pictures of campus and lots of interaction with different students, talking about things like housing and academics and career prep, campus life, on and on and on. They're little puff pieces. Okay, you're not going to get any critical analysis, but they're much like a college tour. They're promotional, but they're really good. I watched Arizona State today, and I thought it was outstanding. So a recommended resource is a show on Amazon Prime called The College Tour, and they're adding new campuses all the time. We will now return to my interview with Julia Hutchinson. And, and I have to commend you, Julia, and hope every student out here listening and parent out here is listening as well, for having an open mind, because I don't know if you remember this, but I remember our first initial conversations about Oxy. And you were like, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember it very vividly. I don't know if I can go to a school that's not that much bigger than my high school. I need at least 10,000. Do you remember those conversations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And even up until recently, maybe this fall or early winter, I felt the same way. I was still very concerned about that. But as I got to know these people better, I realized that this is a community where I want to know everybody and where I would want to just have all these connections and be more of a tight-knit community, because I felt like we would all learn and grow so much from each other, and we each have these very unique interests and passions that we could bring to the table. And I think by seeing the type of people that I would be in this close-knit community with just changed my perspective on what that would be like.
And hopefully, Julie will get good news. We didn't go too much into this in our conversation so far, but Julia's been all the way through the athletic pre-read process, and even that she didn't apply early decision, she's really being given strong indications that she should hopefully get some good news coming up here, because we're recording this. When do the decisions come out exactly? Do you know the exact date?
A few weeks. I'm not sure about the exact date. I heard mid-March from the coach, and it is mid-March, but I talked to the financial aid office a few days ago, and they said a few more weeks. So fingers crossed, it'll be sometime soon.
Fantastic. Nothing excites me as much as when I learn a new method or a new approach that I can share with students and parents that has to do with really pulling the curtain back and really letting people see the school for what it is. Because I know all of the marketing blitz that students encounter going through this process. I mean, we know when you get all the brochures in the mail, the manicured lawns, the diverse people, we call it 3 under a tree, smiling faces, beautiful weather, we know what that looks like. We know all the talk about the clubs and the talk about the new science centers and the new student union and all of that, the food. And we know even the visit itself. It's heavily crafted a lot of times. Like, people are very carefully chosen to be, dynamic. I used to run a tour guide program with over 80 students, and I was very careful about who we picked. We used to have a word, perky. We want perky. And so we know, those people are carefully crafted. The panels are carefully crafted. There's a lot of orchestration designed to represent the school in the absolute best possible way. But really, when it comes to getting to know the culture, that's what you want. You want to really get to know the culture, good and bad, and in this process. And so anytime I learn a new method that students are using to really get to know the culture, I want to shout that from the mountaintop. So this is exciting to me, and I want to make sure that nobody's missed this. So what I'm going to ask you to do, Julia, is kind of restate some of the things you're saying, because I can imagine there's a student or parent that's listening who's thinking, this is a great idea, and I want to do this from a student's perspective or from a parent's perspective. I want my child to do this. So this may seem a little redundant, but I'd rather restate it than have people miss it. So can you sort of walk through step by step what a student should do to get the opportunities that you have had so that they could learn in this format? Like, where do you recommend to start? Just sort of step by step, walk someone through the process if they are like, hey, I want to do it, but I'm not quite completely connecting the dots of how I could sort of do what Julia did.
Yes, there are 2 routes that you could go to kind of get to those end Zoom meetings and Zoom conversations, or to get to those Snapchat group chats that have quite a few less people. The first is through Zeme. So it is an app that you can download, and I would just go download the app and make a profile for yourself and make sure it has some of your interests and things like that people would relate to. Maybe make a little bio about yourself, about where you're from, what you're interested in, what you're going to major in, things like that. And from there, you can select schools that you're applying to or thinking about applying to. And then from there, you can probably scroll through the chat and find a Snapchat group chat to join, or if you don't see one, you can always make one. I've done that. I did that for one of the schools too, and then we ended up getting quite a few people in it. So if you don't see one, make one. And then from there, that's when you can start having conversations with people. And I think that after COVID, people know much more about the resources they have to connect with other people. So everyone's very familiar with Zoom. So finding someone with Zoom Premium is helpful, but getting a Zoom link and just doing that, in my experience, it's come very naturally and organically. But if no one's suggesting it, you can always suggest it, because I've done all of those things and people are very open to it. They just don't want to be the one that first makes that move to come up with some of those ideas.
Next week in the news, do top colleges favor applicants who are extremely wealthy? An article by Scott Jasek from Inside Higher Edge. Mark and Anika will discuss why should I try to avoid changing colleges? Our question from a listener will be, how do admission offices review twins in the college admission process? Our interview will be the final part of a 3-part series with Julia Hutchinson, the senior high school student from Wisconsin, on a creative way to learn what the students are like at the colleges you are considering. And our college spotlight comes to you from, drum roll please, a possible winner of the Final Four or a disappointed runner-up, Baylor University.
Yeah, we'll know tomorrow night.
We'll know tomorrow.
By the way, nothing was relaxing like watching that UCA Gonzaga game. That game, I got back after hanging out, showing my daughter, and my other daughter, Karis, joined me on this trip, and Anitra stayed back home. But we enjoyed visiting and got back, had a dinner, and I got back and watched that game, and that was as thrilling a game. I felt like the old sports the way it used to be, Dave. So I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, you know, I missed that game. I just got the ESPN highlights, like 93-90. I guess they edged them out at the last minute. Gonzaga did.
35-foot bank shot at the buzzer. You know?
Oh yeah.
After it was going back. If this isn't overtime, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, and UCLA had a shot at win the game with 0.7 seconds left. Got a charge call. It's just, that game is so good that it's worth going back to YouTube and watching it. Like, you know who won a game? It sort of takes all the suspense out of it. That game's so good that even with you knowing the winner, you'll be able to love it. So, hoping for a great game tonight. And I'm actually carved out a little break in my schedule today to try to watch the women's championship game at 6. So
awesome. Was that Stanford versus?
Yeah, all Pac-10. Pac-12. Pac-12. Got to get it right. Showing our age. Yeah, Pac-12 dominance. Arizona and Stanford in the women's game, and UCLA goes from first 4 all the way to Final 4. So Pac-12, kudos, shout out to you.
Awesome.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our 3 co-hosts, Anika Madden, Dr. David Williams, and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan, and our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app.
Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.